I thought she'd amount to nothing. Gideon Warwick's voice echoed with smug certainty as he led his radiant new wife, Serafina Voss, into the opulent Etoile restaurant in Los Angeles, its chandeliers casting a golden glow. The CEO, basking in his latest triumph, believed he held the world in his palm until his gaze landed on Zara Nwosu, his scorned ex-wife, laughing confidently beside Cassian Holt, a billionaire tycoon whose influence reshaped industries. Gideon's heart stuttered. The sight of Zara, once dismissed as insignificant, unraveled his certainty, whispering of a colossal mistake. How did she rise so far? What secrets fueled her ascent? If this tale of revenge and redemption intrigues you, hit that subscribe button and share where you're listening from. Day or night? What do you predict for Gideon's reckoning? Stay tuned. Zara's story will leave you breathless. The chandeliers of the Beverly Hills ballroom sparkled like captured stars, casting a golden haze over the elite of Los Angeles. Crystal flutes clinked, laughter rippled through tailored tuxedos and sequined gowns, and the air buzzed with the self-assured hum of wealth. At the heart of this gala, Zara Nwosu stood poised in a sapphire gown, her dark skin glowing under the lights, her smile a practiced mask. 4 years ago, she was the wife of Gideon Warwick, a white CEO whose real estate empire dominated the city's skyline. But beneath her elegance, Zara felt like a ghost, tethered to a man who saw her as little more than an ornament. "Smile, darling," Gideon murmured, his hand firm on her waist as they glided through the crowd. His blue eyes scanned the room, not her, seeking out power brokers to charm. "You're here to make me look good." Zara's heart tightened, but she nodded, her lips curving upward while her dreams simmered in silence. She had confided in him once over a late-night glass of wine about her passion for biotechnology, her vision to develop genetic tests that could detect diseases early, saving lives. Gideon had laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Science? Zara, stick to what you're good at." Looking stunning. Tonight, at this charity gala for a children's hospital, Zara's dream felt closer, yet more unreachable. She clutched her clutch bag, its edges biting into her palm, as she overheard Gideon boast to a group of investors about his latest deal, a $50 million high-rise in downtown LA. His voice carried the confidence of a man who believed the world bent to his will. Zara stood beside him, her presence expected, but her voice unwanted. Then a silver-haired venture capitalist, intrigued by the hospital's cause, turned to her. "Mrs. Warwick, what do you think about the advancements in medical tech? Genetic screening is making waves." Zara's pulse quickened. This was her moment. "It's transformative," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Personalized genetic tests could detect cancer or rare diseases before symptoms even appear, giving patients a fighting chance. I've been reading about—" Gideon cut her off, his laugh slicing through her words like a blade. "Oh, Zara's just dabbling in ideas," he said, his tone patronizing as he waved a hand dismissively. "She thinks she can play scientist, but let's be real, it's a bit out of her league. Right, darling?" The investors chuckled, their eyes sliding past her as if she'd vanished. Zara's cheeks burned, the sting of humiliation sharper than the crystal chandelier's glare. She forced a smile, but inside something cracked. The gala swirled on, a kaleidoscope of wealth and indifference. Zara excused herself, slipping to a quiet corner near a velvet-draped window overlooking the city's glittering sprawl. Her reflection stared back, a woman trapped in a gilded cage. She thought of her mother, a nurse who'd worked nights to raise her, whispering, "You're meant for more, Zara." Yet here she was, reduced to a prop in Gideon's empire, her dream mocked before strangers. The memory of his words, "out of her league," looped in her mind, each repetition a spark igniting her resolve. She wasn't naive. Gideon's world demanded perfection, and she'd played the part, attending galas, smiling for paparazzi, hosting dinners for his clients. But every event chipped away at her, leaving her smaller, less herself. She'd once sketched ideas for a genetic testing startup on napkins, inspired by articles about early cancer detection. Gideon had found one, crumpled it, and said, "Stick to planning my parties, Zara. You're not cut out for this." The dismissal wasn't just cruel, it was a verdict, as if her worth began and ended with him. As the gala's music swelled, Zara's gaze drifted to a table where a young girl, a hospital patient, sat in a wheelchair, her eyes bright despite her frailty. Zara had overheard her story earlier, a rare genetic disorder, caught too late. If only a test had existed, Zara thought, her heart aching. That girl could have been her mother's patient or her own future. The thought was a lightning bolt. She couldn't stay in the shadow any longer. Back at their Bel Air mansion that night, Zara confronted Gideon. The marble foyer echoed their voices, cold and unyielding. "I want to start a company," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Genetic testing, to save lives." Gideon's laugh was sharper than at the gala. "You? A scientist? Zara? You're my wife, not some lab geek. You'll fail, and I won't let you embarrass me." His words were a slap, but they also clarified everything. She wasn't his partner, she was his possession. The next morning, Zara met with a divorce lawyer. The process was brutal. Gideon fought every step, not for love, but for control. "You'll be nothing without me," he sneered during mediation, his blue eyes cold. But Zara held her ground, securing a substantial settlement. As she signed the final papers, she felt a weight lift, replaced by a fire she hadn't known she possessed. She moved out, renting a small apartment in downtown LA, her mind buzzing with plans for Helix Innovations. The city's skyline, once Gideon's domain, now felt like hers to conquer. Standing on her new balcony, Zara clutched a worn journal where she jotted her biotech dreams. "I'll prove you wrong," she whispered, not just to Gideon, but to the part of herself that had believed him. Los Angeles stretched before her, a canvas of possibility. She didn't know how, but she would build something extraordinary, something that would make the world see her, not as Gideon's wife, but as Zara Nwosu, a force unstoppable. Zara Nwosu's new apartment in downtown Los Angeles hummed with the city's restless energy, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a skyline that no longer belonged to Gideon Warwick. 4 years ago, she'd stood in his shadow, her dreams mocked under gala lights. Now, in a modest loft littered with scientific journals and coffee-stained napkins scrawled with biotech ideas, Zara was carving her path. The air smelled of determination and takeout noodles, her only indulgence as she poured every dollar of her divorce settlement into Helix Innovations. Her vision was audacious, genetic tests to detect diseases like cancer before they could steal lives. But the world, it seemed, wasn't ready for a black woman to lead such a charge. The first year was a gauntlet. Zara's days blurred into nights at a co-working space where she pitched to investors who barely looked up from their phones. One venture capitalist, a balding man in a pinstripe suit, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "A black woman in biotech? Stick to something safer, like admin work. Science is a tough game." His words stung, echoing Gideon's scorn, but Zara forced a smile, her voice steady. "My tests will save lives. That's the game I'm playing." He didn't invest, but her resolve hardened. Each rejection was a brick in the wall she was building, not to keep others out, but to protect the fire within. Self-doubt crept in during the quiet hours. Alone at 2 a.m., Zara stared at her laptop, graphs of genetic markers glowing on the screen. What if Gideon was right? What if she was out of her league? Her mother's voice, weathered but fierce, broke through the fog. "You're meant for more, Zara." She'd clutch her journal, pages filled with sketches of DNA sequences and dreams of early detection, and push forward. Helix wasn't just a company, it was her rebellion against a world that tried to shrink her. Funding was scarce, but Zara scraped by with small grants and relentless hustle. She hired a skeleton crew, 3 scientists who believed in her vision, working out of a rented lab with flickering lights. They called her the Dreamer, half teasing, half reverent, as she pored over data late into the night. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly, sparked by a desperate plea from a local pediatrician. A 6-year-old girl, Lily, was fading from a rare genetic disorder, undiagnosed until it was nearly too late. Zara's prototype test, a gamble built on sleepless nights, identified a mutation in Lily's DNA that matched a treatable condition. The results came just in time. Lily's treatment began. and her smile, weak but radiant, became Zara's North Star. The news spread like wildfire. A local paper ran a story: Black entrepreneurs test saves child's life. Suddenly, doors that had slammed shut began to crack open. A biotech conference in San Diego invited Zara to present her first real stage. She stood before a skeptical crowd, her heart pounding, but her voice was a blade of clarity. Helix Innovations isn't just about science, she said, holding up a photo of Lily hugging her mother. It's about giving people a chance to live. Our tests detect diseases before they strike. Cancer, rare disorders, you name it. Who's with me? A venture capitalist in the front row, a woman with sharp eyes, approached afterward. I'm in for $2 million, she said. You're the real deal. Helix grew, moving from a cramped lab to a sleek office in Culver City. Zara's team swelled to 20, a mix of idealistic scientists and scrappy coders, all driven by her vision. She framed Lily's photo on her desk, a reminder of why she fought, but the world wasn't done testing her. At a networking event, a tech bro sneered, "Nice story, but can you scale it?" Zara's jaw tightened, but she fired back, "Watch me." Her confidence was no longer a mask, it was armor, forged in rejection and tempered by success. One evening, scrolling through her phone, Zara paused on a headline: Gideon Warwick marries social media star Serafina Voss. The photo showed Gideon, his smug smile unchanged, beside a radiant young woman in a white gown. Zara's stomach twisted, not with jealousy, but with a flicker of old pain. She remembered his voice. "You'll be nothing without me." She set the phone down, her gaze drifting to the LA skyline. Gideon's world was no longer hers. Helix was her empire, and she was just getting started. As Zara prepared for a pivotal meeting with a potential investor, whispers of her success reached the biotech world. A name surfaced in emails: Cassian Holt, a billionaire tycoon whose dharma dominated pharmaceuticals. If she could win him over, Helix could go global. The thought sent a thrill through her, but also a quiet fear. Could she stand toe-to-toe with a titan like Cassian? She pushed the doubt aside, her mother's words echoing, "You're meant for more." Zara stood before her team, her voice steady. "We're not just building a company," she said, her eyes fierce. "We're building a future where no one dies because a test came too late." They cheered, and in that moment, Zara felt the weight of her past lift. Los Angeles, once a city of gilded cages, was now her battleground. She didn't know it yet, but fate was about to orchestrate a collision, one that would bring her face to face with the man who'd tried to dim her light, in a room glittering with possibility. The Los Angeles skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gideon Warwick's Bel Air mansion, a monument to his conquests. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, but the air held a subtle tension, like a cord strung too tight. Gideon, now a titan in real estate, lounged in a leather armchair, his tailored suit unbuttoned, a glass of bourbon in hand. At 42, his sharp jaw and silver-flecked hair gave him the air of a man who owned time itself. He'd just sealed a $180 million deal for a luxury resort in Santa Barbara, and the victory fueled his swagger. "This is what power feels like, Serafina," he said, his voice a low rumble, as he raised his glass to his new wife. Serafina Voss, 27 and radiant in a silk dress that shimmered like moonlight, stood by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of her phone. Her beauty, honed from years as a social media star, drew millions of followers, but in Gideon's world, she felt like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. "It's incredible, Gideon," she replied, her smile practiced but fragile, her hazel eyes darting to him for approval. She'd traded her influencer life for this, a whirlwind marriage to a man whose name opened doors she'd once only dreamed of. But every step in his orbit felt like a test she wasn't sure she'd pass. Gideon barely noticed her unease, his mind on his triumph. "Santa Barbara's going to be a game changer," he boasted, swirling his bourbon. "Oceanfront villas, private helipads. The elite will beg to stay there. I'm untouchable now." His confidence was a force, filling the room, but it left little space for Serafina. She nodded, her lips parting to speak, then closing again. She wanted to tell him about her dream, a fashion line, something bold and hers alone. But the memory of his dismissive glance when she'd mentioned it last week silenced her. "Stick to looking good, darling," he'd said. That's your brand. Serafina turned to her phone, her refuge. She scrolled through Instagram, her feed a cascade of curated perfection, and posted a photo from their engagement. Her in a white gown, Gideon's arm around her, the Pacific sparkling behind them. Her caption read, "Trying to belong in this world, am I doing it right?" The likes poured in, but the comments, "You're living the dream," felt hollow. She wasn't living her dream. She was decorating someone else's. Her fingers hovered over a sketch app where she doodled designs for a dress collection, vibrant patterns inspired by her coastal roots. But doubt gnawed at her. What if Gideon laughed, like he had at others who dared to dream in his shadow? At dinner, over plates of seared scallops, Gideon's phone buzzed with congratulations from business partners. He grinned, reading a text aloud. "Warwick, you've outdone yourself with Santa Barbara." He leaned back, his eyes gleaming. "This is why I'm the best, Serafina. No one else could pull this off." She forced a smile, her fork tracing patterns in her sauce. "You're amazing," she said softly. But her mind wandered to a podcast she'd heard about a woman who'd built a tech empire from nothing. The name Zara Nwosu had stuck with her, though she didn't know why. Gideon never spoke of his ex-wife, and Serafina hadn't asked. To her, Zara was a ghost, irrelevant to their glittering present. But Gideon's past wasn't as buried as he thought. In a rare quiet moment, as Serafina cleared the plates, he glanced at a business magazine on the counter. A small headline caught his eye. "Helix Innovations saves child's life with genetic test." The name Zara Nwosu leapt out, a jolt to his system. He shoved the magazine under a stack of papers, his jaw tight. "She got lucky," he muttered to himself, dismissing the flicker of unease. Zara was nothing without him. He'd told her so during their divorce. She'd fade, he was sure, just another dreamer crushed by reality. He turned to Serafina, his voice commanding. "We're celebrating at Etoile this Friday. Best table, best wine. I want the world to see us." Serafina nodded, her heart sinking. Etoile was the pinnacle of LA's elite dining, a place where power was displayed as much as savored. She'd wear the silver gown he'd chosen, play the part of the perfect wife, but the thought made her chest tighten. What if she faltered under those chandeliers? What if she wasn't enough? As they prepared for bed, Serafina stood before the mirror, brushing her long hair, her reflection a study in contrast, beauty and uncertainty. She opened her sketch app again, tracing a dress design with bold, swirling lines. "One day," she whispered, barely audible. Gideon, already in bed, didn't hear. His mind was on Etoile, on the image he'd project. A man at the peak of his empire, untouchable, with a stunning wife at his side. He didn't know fate was conspiring to shatter that illusion, to bring him face to face with the woman he'd dismissed as nothing. Serafina posted one last photo before sleep, a candid of her silhouette against the LA skyline. "Chasing dreams in a world that's not mine," she captioned it, her fingers trembling. The city stretched before her, vast and unforgiving, but somewhere in its depths, a spark of her own ambition flickered. Little did she know, a chance encounter at Etoile would light a fire, not just for her, but for the man whose arrogance was about to meet its match. Chapter 4. The Reckoning at Etoile. The air in Etoile shimmered with decadence, chandeliers casting prisms across white-clothed tables, the soft hum of violin strings weaving through hushed conversations. Gideon Warwick strode in, his tailored suit a testament to his dominance, his new wife Serafina Voss at his side, her silver gown catching every eye. He was here to celebrate his $180 million Santa Barbara resort deal, to bask in the glow of his untouchable empire. But as he scanned the room, his gaze snagged on a familiar figure, and the world tilted. Zara Nwosu, his ex-wife, sat at a corner table, her sapphire dress radiant, her laughter bright as she leaned toward Cassian Holt, a billionaire tycoon whose name commanded the pharmaceutical world. Gideon's breath caught, his confidence fracturing like glass. Gideon Warwick, CEO, led Serafina to Etoile, believing he held the world. But seeing Zara, the ex-wife he scorned, with Cassian Holt, shook him to his core, revealing his colossal mistake. The memory of his own words, You'll be nothing without me, stung like a lash as he watched Zara, poised and powerful, her dark eyes alight with purpose. She was no longer the woman he'd dismissed at that gala 4 years ago. She was a force, and he hadn't seen it coming. Cassian, in a charcoal suit, exuded quiet authority, his presence a magnet for the room's attention. Zara, your genetic tests are revolutionary, he said, his voice low but resonant. You've saved thousands already. Lung cancer, rare disorders. My firm controls 30% of global pharma, and I'm betting 200 million on Helix to change the world. Zara's smile was steady, her voice clear. It's not just about science, Cassian. It's about giving people time. Time to live, to love. Their ease, their shared vision, pierced Gideon like a blade. He gripped Serafina's arm, his knuckles whitening. Serafina, sensing the shift, glanced at Zara, then at Gideon. "Who's that?" she whispered, her hazel eyes wide. Gideon forced a smile, his voice tight. "Just someone from my past." But he couldn't look away. Zara's confidence, her command of the table, was a stark contrast to the woman he'd belittled. He led Serafina to their table, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the divorce mediation where he'd sneered, "You're not cut out for anything big." Now she was dining with a titan, her star rising while his felt dim. Unable to resist, Gideon approached Zara's table, Serafina trailing hesitantly. "Zara," he said, his tone a forced blend of charm and bravado, "didn't expect to see you here. You look, well." Zara's eyes met his, unflinching, a spark of defiance beneath her calm. "Gideon," she replied smoothly. "This is Cassian Holt, my business partner." Cassian stood, offering a firm handshake. "Gideon Warwick," he said, his gaze assessing. "Your real estate ventures are impressive. Quite the night for a reunion." Gideon's chest tightened, but he seized the moment to assert himself. "Just closed a $180 million resort deal in Santa Barbara," he boasted, his smile sharp. "Oceanfront, elite clientele. You know, the big leagues." He expected Zara to shrink, as she once had. Instead, she leaned back, her expression serene. "Congratulations," she said, then paused, her voice cutting like velvet. "Helix just signed a $200 million deal with Cassian to take our genetic test global. They've already saved thousands, detecting cancers, giving kids like Lily a chance." The words hit Gideon like a tidal wave. His hand trembled and his wine glass slipped, shattering on the floor, red liquid pooling like blood. The room hushed, eyes turning, but Zara didn't flinch. Serafina gasped, her voice soft but awed. "You save lives? That's incredible, Zara." Gideon's face burned, his bravado crumbling. Cassian added, his tone matter-of-fact. "Zara's the only one I'd trust to reshape healthcare. Her vision's unmatched." Gideon forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Impressive," he managed, his voice cracking. "Really, well done." Zara's gaze held his, unflinching. "Thank you, Gideon. I'm just doing what you said I couldn't." The words were a quiet dagger, slicing through his pride. Serafina touched his arm, her eyes flickering between admiration for Zara and concern for him. "We should sit," she murmured, but Gideon barely heard, his world tilting further. As Zara and Cassian resumed their conversation, their laughter a soft rebuke, Gideon returned to his table, his steps unsteady. Serafina pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she opened Instagram and found a post about Helix's latest breakthrough. The caption mentioned Zara's name, and Serafina's breath caught. This was the woman Gideon had dismissed? She glanced at him, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Zara's table. For the first time, Serafina saw cracks in his invincible facade. Zara, oblivious to Gideon's turmoil, signed a contract page with Cassian, her pen moving with purpose. She felt no need to prove herself to the man who'd once defined her worth. The city's lights glittered beyond Etoile's windows, a reminder of the empire she was building. But as she laughed at Cassian's quip, a quiet question lingered. Would this moment, this collision with her past, spark something new in the woman watching her with wide, curious eyes? The murmur of Etoile's elite diners swirled around Zara Nwosu as she lingered near the restaurant's sleek bar, a glass of Pinot Noir in hand. Her sapphire dress caught the chandelier's glow, but her mind was on the contract she'd just signed with Cassie and Holt. A $200 million deal to take Helix Innovations global. The weight of her triumph settled like a quiet victory, drowning out the sting of Gideon Warwick's presence across the room. She'd faced her past, delivered a verbal blow that left him reeling, and now she was free. Or so she thought. A soft voice broke her reverie, tentative but curious. Zara, I hope I'm not intruding. Serafina Voss stood before her, her silver gown shimmering, her hazel eyes wide with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Zara recognized her instantly, Gideon's new wife, the young woman whose arm had clung to his like a lifeline. But here, in the dim light of Etoile's lounge area, Serafina seemed different, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for judgment. Zara offered a warm smile, setting her glass down. Not at all, Serafina. It's nice to see you. Serafina fidgeted, her fingers clutching her phone, its screen glowing with an article about Helix's breakthrough in detecting childhood cancers. I read about you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. How you saved that little girl, Lily, with your test. How did you do it? Build all this from nothing? Her words trembled with a hunger Zara recognized, the ache to be more than an accessory in someone else's story. Zara leaned against the bar, her gaze steady but kind. It wasn't from nothing, she said. I had a dream. Genetic tests to catch diseases early, to give people time. But I also had doubts, people telling me I couldn't do it. My ex-husband was one of them. She paused, letting the weight of Gideon's name linger unspoken. I learned to trust myself, Serafina. That's what carried me through. Serafina's eyes glistened, her fingers tightening around her phone. I want that, she confessed, her voice cracking. I used to design clothes, sketches, patterns, things that felt like me. But Gideon, he says it's a silly hobby, that I'm better off just being his wife. She glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting him to appear, then lowered her voice. I feel like I'm disappearing in his world. How did you stop feeling small? Zara's heart twinged, remembering her nights of doubt, Gideon's laughter echoing in her mind. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. You stop feeling small when you start building something that's yours. Your designs aren't a hobby, they're your voice. Don't let anyone, not even Gideon, silence it. You're enough, Serafina. More than enough. Serafina's breath hitched, and she opened her phone, revealing a sketch app with a vibrant dress design. Bold swirls of turquoise and coral, inspired by the Pacific's tides. This is mine, she said, almost to herself. I've been too scared to show anyone. What if I fail? Zara placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of quiet strength. Failure's just a step, not a sentence. Start small, but start. You'll surprise yourself. Across the room, Gideon sat at their table, his bourbon untouched, his eyes darting toward the lounge. The image of Zara, confident, commanding, beside a titan like Cassian Holt, gnawed at him. His hand still shook from the wine glass he dropped, its shards swept away by a waiter, but etched in his memory. Serafina's absence at the table irritated him, but her question earlier, "Who's that?" had struck deeper. He dismissed Zara as nothing, yet here she was, outshining him. The thought twisted like a knife. Serafina returned, her steps lighter, her eyes brighter. Gideon frowned, sensing a shift. Where were you? He asked, his tone sharp. She hesitated, then met his gaze. Talking to Zara, she said, her voice steadier than before. She's incredible. Gideon's jaw tightened, but he forced a chuckle. She got lucky, he said, waving a hand. Don't waste your time on her. But Serafina's silence spoke volumes, her fingers tracing the edge of her phone, where her dress sketch waited. Zara rejoined Cassian, their conversation resuming with ease. You handled that well, he said, nodding toward Gideon's table. Not everyone can face their past like that. Zara smiled, a quiet fire in her eyes. It's not about facing him. It's about owning me. She signed another contract page, her pen a declaration of independence. The city's lights sparkled beyond Etoile's windows, a canvas of her rising empire. Serafina, back at Gideon's side, felt a spark ignite. Zara's words echoed. You're enough. She glanced at her phone, her sketch glowing like a promise. For the first time, she imagined a future not defined by Gideon's shadow. Gideon, meanwhile, stared into his drink, the ghost of Zara's triumph haunting him. The night wasn't over, but its revelations had already begun to reshape their worlds, setting the stage for choices that would echo far beyond Etoile's gilded walls. Gideon Warwick sat rigid at his table in Etoile, the clink of cutlery and murmur of diners a distant hum against the storm in his mind. The shards of his shattered wineglass were gone, swept away by an efficient waiter, but the memory of his fumble burned, a public crack in his polished armor. Across the room, Zara Nwosu had left with Cassie and Holt, their silhouettes fading into the Los Angeles night, but her presence lingered like a specter. Her words, "I'm just doing what you said I couldn't," cut deeper than Gideon cared to admit, slicing through the arrogance he'd worn like a crown. Serafina Voss, his new wife, sat across from him, her silver gown catching the chandelier's glow, but her eyes were distant, fixed on her phone where a sketch of a vibrant dress glowed, a silent rebellion brewing. Who was that woman, Gideon? Serafina's voice was soft but pointed, her hazel eyes lifting to meet his. The question caught him off guard, like a pebble rippling a still pond. He forced a chuckle, his fingers tightening around his bourbon glass. Just my ex-wife, Zara, he said, aiming for nonchalance. She got lucky with some startup. Nothing is worth your time. But his voice betrayed him, a slight tremor revealing the lie. Serafina's brow furrowed, her fingers pausing on her phone. Lucky? She's saving lives, Gideon. That's extraordinary. Her tone held a mix of awe and something sharper, curiosity that bordered on challenge. Gideon's jaw clenched, the bourbon's burn doing little to dull the unease coiling in his chest. He'd built an empire in real estate, closed deals that made headlines. Yet Zara's triumph, a $200 million deal with a titan like Cassie and Holt, cast a shadow he couldn't ignore. His mind flashed back to a gala 4 years prior, the same one where he'd mocked her dreams. The Beverly Hills ballroom had buzzed with elite chatter, and Zara, radiant in sapphire, had dared to speak of genetic testing to a venture capitalist. Gideon had laughed, loud enough for heads to turn. Zara thinks she's a scientist, he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. Stick to looking pretty, darling. The crowd's chuckles had drowned out her silence, but her eyes, dark, wounded, yet defiant, haunted him now. He shook off the memory, his grip on the glass tightening until his knuckles whitened. She's not what you think, he told Serafina, his tone sharper than intended. She was nothing without me. I gave her everything. But the words felt hollow, a script he no longer believed. Serafina tilted her head, her gaze piercing. Then why does she seem so unstoppable? The question hung in the air, a quiet accusation. Gideon's pulse quickened, his confidence unraveling like a frayed thread. He wanted to snap back, to reassert his dominance, but the image of Zara, poised, commanding, beside a man who reshaped industries, choked his words. Serafina set her phone down, the sketch of her dress, a swirl of turquoise and coral, still glowing. I talked to her, she admitted, her voice steady now. She told me to trust myself, to build something that's mine. I want that, Gideon. Her words were a spark, igniting a tension he hadn't anticipated. He stared at her, the woman he'd chosen for her beauty and compliance, now daring to speak of dreams he hadn't sanctioned. What, your little fashion sketches? He said, his laugh forced. Don't be ridiculous, Serafina. You're my wife. Focus on that. But her silence was louder than his words, her eyes holding a resolve he didn't recognize. The restaurant's violin swelled, a mournful note that mirrored Gideon's unease. He glanced toward the empty corner where Zara had sat, her laughter with Cassian echoing in his mind. He'd dismissed her as a dreamer, a failure, yet she'd built something bigger than his resort deal, something that saved lives, not just egos. His hand trembled, a faint tremor he hid by draining his bourbon. The truth was a bitter pill. He'd underestimated her, and the cost was staring him in the face. He'd lost not just a wife, but a woman who'd outgrown his shadow. Serafina watched him, her fingers tracing the edge of her phone. You never talk about her, she said softly. Why? Gideon's throat tightened, his mind racing for an answer that wouldn't betray his regret. Because she's the past, he snapped. But his eyes betrayed him, darting to the door where Zara had vanished. Serafina's gaze followed, and for a moment, she saw not her husband, but a man grappling with a mistake he couldn't undo. As the waiter brought their dessert, untouched plates gleaming in the candlelight, Gideon felt the weight of his hubris. Zara's triumph wasn't just a business deal, it was a mirror, reflecting his failure to see her worth. Serafina, meanwhile, slipped her phone into her purse, her sketch a quiet promise. Zara's words, "You're enough," echoed in her mind, a beacon in the fog of her uncertainty. Gideon stared into the night beyond Etoile's windows, the city's lights a taunt. He'd thought himself untouchable, but tonight he was a king on a crumbling throne, and the woman he'd scorned was rewriting the rules of the game. Zara Nwosu stood at the edge of a sleek stage, the Los Angeles Convention Center awash in the glow of 1,000 lights. 3 months had passed since that fateful night at Etoile, where she'd faced Gideon Warwick's stunned gaze and left him grasping at the fragments of his pride. Now her world was brighter, boundless. Helix Innovations had inked a $200 million deal with Cassian Holt's pharmaceutical empire, propelling her genetic testing technology to clinics worldwide. The tests, once a dream scrawled on napkins, now detected cancers and rare disorders before they could steal lives. Tonight, as she prepared to accept the Innovator of the Year award, Zara felt not just success, but freedom, a shedding of the chains Gideon had once tried to bind her with. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation, biotech leaders and investors filling the seats, their eyes on Zara. Her emerald gown hugged her frame, a nod to her triumph, its fabric catching the spotlight as she stepped forward. Cassian Holt, seated in the front row, gave her a nod, his presence a quiet testament to her ascent. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "Zara Nwosu, whose vision has redefined healthcare." Applause erupted, a wave that lifted her heart. She gripped the podium, her voice steady but warm. "This isn't just about science," she began. "It's about time. Time for families, for dreams, for life. Helix gives that back." As she spoke, her mind drifted to Lily, the 6-year-old whose life her prototype test had saved. That victory had been her spark, proof she could defy the voices, Gideon's, the investors, her own, that had once whispered she wasn't enough. But the moment that anchored her came unexpectedly. As she stepped off the stage, a young girl in a wheelchair rolled forward, her mother beside her, tears streaming. "Ms. Nosu," the mother said, her voice trembling, "I'm Lily's mom. Your test caught her cancer early. She's here because of you." Lily, her eyes bright despite her frailty, held out a drawing, a stick figure in a green dress, labeled "My Hero." Zara knelt, her throat tight. "You're my hero, Lily," she whispered, hugging the girl. The crowd's applause faded, but this moment burned brighter than any award. Backstage, Zara clutched the drawing, her fingers tracing Lily's crayon lines. She'd built Helix not to prove Gideon wrong, but to prove herself right. The memory of his scorn, at that gala in their divorce, felt distant now, like a storm that had passed. She'd read a headline about him recently, his marriage to Serafina Voss splashed across tabloids, but it stirred nothing. Her worth was no longer tied to his world. She was Zara Nwosu, a name that stood alone, etched in lives saved and futures reshaped. Cassian approached, his charcoal suit impeccable, his smile rare but genuine. "You've changed the game, Zara," he said. "I've turned down countless pitches, but your vision, it's unmatched. This is just the beginning." Zara nodded, her eyes gleaming. "It's for people like Lily," she replied. "That's what drives me." Cassian's gaze softened, a respect that felt like a partnership, not a transaction. Their deal was more than money. It was a shared mission to rewrite healthcare's future. In her Culver City office later that night, Zara stood by the window, the Los Angeles skyline a tapestry of ambition. Her desk held Lily's drawing, framed beside her award, a reminder of why she fought. She opened her laptop, emails flooding in, hospitals adopting her tests, researchers seeking collaboration. One message caught her eye, a biotech conference in London, inviting her to keynote. The world was calling, and she was ready to answer. Gideon's voice, once a deafening echo, was now a faint murmur, drowned out by her own. She thought briefly of Serafina, the young woman whose eyes had held a flicker of longing at Étoile. Zara hoped her words had taken root, that Serafina was finding her path. But that was her story to write. Zara was here, in this office, in the lives her test touched. She closed her laptop, her reflection in the glass, a portrait of resilience. The city stretched before her, no longer a battleground but a canvas where she painted her legacy. As she turned off the lights, her phone buzzed, a notification from a news app. Gideon's Santa Barbara resort had opened to fanfare, but the article mentioned a delay, a hint of trouble. Zara smiled faintly, not out of spite, but because it didn't matter. Her empire was built on saving lives, not chasing headlines. She stepped into the elevator, the hum of her success louder than any applause. The past was behind her, and the future, bright, boundless, was hers to shape. Zara Nwosu stood on the rooftop of Helix Innovations' Culver City headquarters, the Los Angeles skyline, a constellation of lights stretching into the night. The cool breeze carried the hum of a city that had once caged her dreams, but now celebrated them. 3 months after her Innovator of the Year award, Helix's genetic tests were saving lives across continents, from rural clinics to urban hospitals. The framed drawing from Lily, the child whose life she'd helped save, sat on her desk below, a quiet anchor amid the whirlwind of her success. Zara's emerald gown from the conference had been replaced by a tailored blazer, her presence a blend of grace and authority. She held a new contract for a London partnership, her signature drawing on the page, a testament to a future she'd built without Gideon Warwick's shadow. Her phone buzzed, a news alert flashing. Warwick's Santa Barbara resort faces delays amid investor backlash. Zara's lips curved, not in malice but in indifference. Gideon's empire, once a looming specter, was irrelevant now. She'd read his email last week, a halting apology, words like, "I underestimated you," and "I'm sorry," typed in a font that felt too small for his ego. She hadn't replied. Her silence wasn't vengeance, it was closure. Her worth, once tethered to his approval, was now her own, forged in sleepless nights and lives saved. The city's glow felt like a mirror, reflecting the woman she'd become, unstoppable, unbound. Across town, in a loft bathed in soft lamplight, Serafina Voss stood before a mannequin draped in turquoise and coral fabric. Her first dress design come to life. The patterns swirled like ocean tides, a nod to her coastal roots, and her heart raced with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Months ago at Étoile, Zara's words, "You're enough," had ignited a spark. Serafina had spent weeks sketching, stitching, and pitching to small boutiques, her Instagram now a canvas of her creations, rather than curated poses for Gideon's world. Her latest post, a photo of the dress, read, "Inspired by a woman who dared me to be myself. This is my start." Comments flooded in, praising her bold aesthetic, and for the first time Serafina felt seen, not as Gideon's wife, but as a creator. She glanced at her phone, hesitating, then opened a message to Zara. "Ms. Nwosu, I launched my first design because of you," she typed. "Thank you for showing me I could." She hit send, her breath catching, unsure if Zara would reply, but grateful for the courage she'd found. At a fashion pop-up event the next week, a buyer from a high-end store approached, offering to stock her designs. Serafina's eyes welled as she nodded, her dream no longer a whisper, but a reality taking shape. Gideon, meanwhile, sat alone in his Bel Air office, the marble walls cold against his solitude. The Santa Barbara resort, his crowning achievement, was unraveling. Investors pulling out, headlines questioning his judgment. He stared at his laptop, Zara's name glowing in a Forbes article. Zara Nwosu redefines biotech with global impact. His email to her, sent in a moment of late-night vulnerability, remained unanswered. "I was wrong," he'd written, the words raw and unpracticed. "You were always more than I saw." But her silence was louder than any rebuke, a mirror to his failure, not just to keep her, but to recognize her light. He remembered the gala 4 years ago, his laughter at her dreams echoing in the ballroom, the way her eyes had flickered with hurt. Now that memory was a weight, heavy with regret. He'd built towers, but Zara had built hope. His phone buzzed. A text from Serafina. At my fashion event. Won't be home tonight. Her absence stung, a reminder of her growing independence. She'd stopped seeking his approval, her sketches no longer hidden, her voice no longer soft. Gideon poured another bourbon, the glass trembling in his hand. He'd thought himself a king, but kings could fall. At the fashion event, Serafina spotted a familiar figure in the crowd. Zara, there to support a hospital charity tied to Helix. Their eyes met, and Serafina approached, her voice steady. Zara, your words at Etoile changed me. This, she gestured to her dress display, is because of you. Zara smiled, her warmth genuine. It's because of you, Serafina. You chose to shine. They shared a moment, two women carving their paths, unbound by the men who'd tried to define them. Back on her rooftop, Zara looked out at Los Angeles, the city no longer a battlefield but a partner in her ascent. Helix was her legacy, not just in labs but in lives like Lily's, in sparks like Serafina's. She tucked the London contract into her bag, her heart full. Gideon's regret, Serafina's courage, the world's applause. They were ripples, not her center. Her center was her own, built from dreams she'd dared to chase. The skyline shimmered, a promise of more to come. Zara closed her eyes, the breeze carrying her forward. This is just the beginning, she whispered, her voice a vow to herself, to the girl who'd once stood in a gala's shadow, into every life her work would touch. The stars above echoed her light, a beacon of her own making. Your value isn't what others think, but what you dare to build. Zara's journey from a scorned shadow to a beacon of hope leaves us with a truth. Our worth is forged in the fires we dare to face. What did her story stir in you? Did Gideon's regret or Serafina's courage resonate most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from and what this tale meant to you. Thank you for joining us in this tale of triumph and redemption. Until next time, keep chasing your light. We'll meet again soon.